YouTube video which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths. Actually, rather more when we get to the sequels. In particular, Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother Franklin. It is all the more tragic in that they were young, but had they lived very, very long lives, they could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that very day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare, and the events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Parts 1 and 2 are the particular films which we will be discussing in detail today. I had another take of this video, and I'm finding trouble finding the words because there is so much to go over, and I don't know where to jump in. There are not particularly any mysteries about the first 2 Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, but there are quite a few things that I wanted to point out to the viewers if they haven't noticed them already. First of all, the second film is a story of revenge. Bitter, dire, desperate revenge from the character of Lefty Hardesty, I suppose would be the last name, because he's a brother of Franklin. And he is avenging Franklin. And he must have really, really loved that brother, and possibly maybe the only one who did love him this much, because he totally wails on the Sawyers. One of the really cool things in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies is that whenever they have a public dining occasion, they like to wheel out their grandpa to take the whack at the victim and put it to death. And that seems to be their tradition. I wonder if they do this for every victim or if it's just on special occasions. But whenever they have a captive, they want to have the grandpa take a wing at it. And when the grandpa usually first appears, he always looks half dead and weak, and you're thinking, he's never going to do it. But gradually, as he keeps trying, he picks up momentum. And being that Grandpa is the best killer there ever was, I'm really, really curious as to whether he actually can snap into it under the right circumstances. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 is really good for this because he does pick up momentum. I mean, you saw a little bit of that in the first movie, but in this one, he keeps going until he finally has enough energy. The one other interesting thing about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is that they're carrying around a corpse of some kind, a dead body, who is referred to as Nubbin. And Nubbin, I'm trying to figure out who Nubbin would be in relation to their family. Obviously, some of you will probably think, well, it's just a whole new thing altogether. But let's think about this. Of the first film, who could Nubbin be? Now, the family likes to keep, if someone close, if a relative dies near to them, they like to hold their bodies around and just sit them in a chair and interact with them. They do that for the grandma character. In fact, they pretend that she's still alive at the end of Part 2. And my theory about the Nubbin body is that maybe it's the gas station attendant, that guy with the thick forehead who's supposed to be kind of slow. Maybe he's some kind of Vietnam veteran or something. Maybe that's why Nubbin is in the camo gear, and maybe somewhere down the road he died of natural causes, and they brought him back into the second film and were carrying him around as Nubbin, and Leatherface was playing around with him as his best friend. And it would be really interesting if Leatherface would befriend someone like that gas station attendant, because they're both sort of, they have lesser intelligence and so forth. One thing that some of you may be aware of is that most people do not get killed with the chainsaw in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, at least not in the first one at least, because most of them get done in with the hammer. And when you think about it, it makes sense, given the fact that the chainsaw is a rather awkward weapon to yield. It's very heavy, which means you won't be able to move very fast, and rather loud. And with those two factors combined, you have very little chance of gaining the element of surprise. So without the element of surprise, you have to sort of chase people and have them know you are coming. And And you also run the risk of running out of gas, which Leatherface does in part two. He runs out of gas when he's attacking Stretch. Again, now we're gonna have spoilers in these little programs, so if you haven't seen the films, don't be listening to the program. But for the record, the only person who gets killed with a chainsaw in the first film is Franklin. And everyone else gets knocked on the head with a hammer, unless maybe you think that Kirk is still alive somehow and getting the finishing touches when Leatherface carves him up. I have the temptation to call him Meatloaf because he's kind of a big fat guy. Anyway, most people don't get killed with a chainsaw until later films when the public appeal demanded it. Even though the films are titled as such, most of these movies are not official sequels to one another. The only one that is really an official sequel is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and even that is a little bit silly for some people, so they'd rather forget it. Particularly, the character of Chop Top is the hitchhiker from Part 1, most likely, come back so that having survived being run over by the semi in the first film. And, for me, that was the hard part about Part 2, was that, I wanted to consider the hitchhiker dead at the end of Part 1. And so to accept Part 2, you sort of have to change things around like that. And that's sort of what viewers get. That's the type of thing viewers get upset about. But, once I toss that aside, Part 2 is an amazing film with lots of great scenery. And just a lot of interesting things happening. And that duel to the death between Lefty and Leatherface. And the grandpa finally rising up to throw his hammer at someone. And if you look at it with a little bit of imagination, it's very possible that the grandpa kills Leatherface with the hammer. I like to see it that way because they always get into the way of saying, never took more than one lick. They say he could have done more if they'd gotten the beeves out of the way fast enough. And so anyway, Grandpa gains momentum, finally throws his hammer, it lands in the face of Leatherface, and it knocks him kind of woozy before the grenade goes off.